Hello, good evening. Welcome once again, and tonight my guest that will be discussing with us the topic franchising and companies that would want to get interested, or even you as an individual, if you have money and you're interested in franchising, tonight is your time to know that. And my guest is Wambugu Gechohi. You're very welcome. As a franchising consultant with World Ahead and also works with the East African Business Council. You're very welcome.
Thank you very much.
Let's delve into this topic very, very fast. Most people probably do not know exactly what it is. Those who are into the business probably know what we're talking about, but those who probably might have money right now and they need to do the business, what is it about? What is franchising?
Thank you very much for having me here tonight. Franchising, the easiest way to understand franchising is to think of a brand, a successful brand that has a track record of profitability, allowing a smaller business to operate on its own brand in order to distribute selected goods and services over an agreed period of time. And the best examples you would probably think about right now in Kampala, you know, most fuel companies, most of the international fuel companies work on the franchise model, the Totals, the Shells of this world. Then there are the fast foods like the KFC, the clothing lines like the Woolworths. Yeah.
But who can invest in such a business, by the way? Because most of the people are trying to encourage here. I mean, people who said these are very expensive ventures. Like you said, we have franchises, we have Total, Shell, these big, huge companies, and every time people look at these brands, they say to themselves, when will I even get there?
Absolutely.
Who can invest in such a business, and who should be interested? Why are we actually even discussing it?
Good question. Indeed, what comes out when you think of those big brands is the high cost of investment in acquiring the franchise. And it's
very capital intensive.
Yes, they are very, very high capital intensive. However, one thing that we must also not forget is that these big brands were once small brands. What am I trying to lead to here? We have a lot of local businesses who have strong brands and a lot of history of success in their own way. All they need to do is tune their minds to disrupt themselves from their current models and work towards franchising. That way, we'll be able to get smaller kind of investments, or rather, that will be able to offer local successful brands to smaller investors. Yeah.
Well, let's now go to the very critical issues, because I mean, we will discuss franchising here, and you know, people have money and they just throw it in there, and very many times people throw money into businesses, but one would really want to know what are the legal technicalities in the event that one wants to invest in that kind of business.
Before you franchise, okay, in terms of franchising, there are two legal elements you need to look at from either the franchisee perspective or the franchisor perspective. One of the things you need to understand is that always the franchise system needs to be protected legally. Meaning, for you as a franchisee looking to acquire a franchisor, you must play to the rules set already by the franchisor. Meaning, therefore, that you must sign what they call the franchise agreement. Of course, you are given time to read through it, understand it. Then if you like it, then you sign it. But what you're saying in short is that it is the franchisor who calls the shots here, not the franchisee. Okay? But also, from the franchisee side, you have a choice as to what kind of investments, or rather franchise investments, you want to go into. And in terms of the legal elements, there are bigger legal elements rather than just the franchisor, because when you look at countries where franchising has blossomed over the years, laws are in place already to protect both parties. In this part of the world, we have no franchise laws. So even in other countries where no laws are available, we have franchise associations that are very, very strong, that work as self-regulatory mechanisms for the sector. Again, in this part of the world, we do not have franchise associations.
That sounds even strange. I mean, how are these businesses surviving here? What exactly are you talking about? That these big brands we see around are operating in an environment where there is no regulation, or what? Apart from, what exactly is happening?
Okay, in the absence of all those things that I've said, what guides the franchise business normally is a normal company law. So on top of the normal company law, you've got to be very careful about the individual industry regulations and laws that you need to play around. You need to play with. Then also there are of course there is the international franchise code of ethics that most of the big brands that you see here would already have signed under the World Franchise Council. So it's not really that open that someone can come in and play around. However, we have seen cases, particularly in countries where there are no where there is no Consumer Protection Act. We have seen cases where franchisors take advantage of gullible franchisees. Yes.
Okay, so we have terms here which might sound so confusing to the viewer right now, and you're talking about franchisee, franchisor, and probably maybe you need to let people know who a franchisor and a franchisee is. I have had some experts saying one of either of the franchisor or the franchisee, they clones a business. I can clone your business and do the same business in my country. But maybe just break it down. Who is a franchisor? Who is a franchisee?
In introductory remarks, I mentioned of the big brand and allowing a smaller brand, a smaller business to operate on its brand. So the bigger brand in this case is the franchisor, the one that has a successful track record. Then the small business that is allowed to run on the intellectual property and the business systems of the first brand is what we call the franchisee. Therefore, if you like, there is a franchisor who then deploys an army of dedicated, individually owned businesses to work on their own, but running on the franchisor's brand. Yes.
One must have a very huge capital base, for instance, if they need to invest in a business like this. I mean, in this part of the world, is this a market? What has been the trend? Franchises grow? Do you see growth, or do you see a drop in franchises opening here? Because we've seen some of them come and close off. And what could be a threat to some of these businesses from where you sit?
There are a number of reasons that has made it very, very attractive for foreign franchises that you see coming to this part of the world. Number one, the expanding middle class in these countries, in East Africa and Africa in general. Although it's still not large enough to support high consumption, it is seen as growing, and therefore a lot of those companies find this as a lucrative market. Secondly, saturation back home. As you would imagine, a lot of these companies have been in existence over the years. They've covered most of the areas they needed to cover out there back home, so now they've got to look for new markets. But as you say correctly, for local businessmen looking to invest in such franchises, it can be quite steep, because an average joining fee for a franchise could run anywhere between $10,000 to $1 million, or sometimes more. Yeah,
I have seen brands here. I don't know whether they're franchises or they're just fake. How would you tell that this is a franchise? For instance, I've seen, I will not name them because, but I have seen them here. Is that a problem? Is that one of the challenges that these huge brands find? I mean, are we even getting involved in buying fake things, thinking this is a franchise of a big brand that we know somewhere in a foreign country? What are some of the challenges involved in this kind of business?
Back again to my initial introductory remarks, where I said there's this big brand and the smaller business. The big brand can only allow the smaller brands to run on their brands if they have legally protected their intellectual property. Meaning, therefore, that if you walk on the streets and find, for example, Mr. Price, or use just an example of Mr. Price. Mr. Price is a South African brand. Before they come into East Africa, they would have already protected their intellectual property in East Africa. And remember, in legal circles, intellectual property rights are territorial, meaning you have to register them in every country that you want to trade in. So here we're talking about the strength of the legal system in terms of being able to monitor, and not exactly monitor, basically being able to determine who owns what intellectual property. But it will be foolhardy for any international or even local franchisee and all other franchisor to try franchise their brand if they have not already protected their intellectual property, because it will be open to abuse. It's just like you registering your own company, and then if in Kampala, then you find someone else in Barara is using the same company name without them looking whether it's already registered or not. Yeah. So, but in terms of counterfeits and so on, that's a different ballgame. I mean, in terms of how counterfeit goods led into a country, that's a completely different ballgame. Suffice it here to say that Mr. Price is Mr. Price.
A business person right now, as we go out, would love to know really whether this is an area that they really need to put their money. And that's, I asked you that question just a while ago. You said it is steep. The people out here who have money, is this an area, my last question to you, that someone would really want to put their money as a consultant, an expert in that area?
Franchising is the next big thing in East Africa. I can confidently say that, particularly for local brands. As you mentioned earlier, I work under the East Africa Business Council. At the East Africa Business Council, we have set up a project aimed at creating 1,500 local indigenous-driven, or rather indigenous brands across East Africa. And we suspect that about 400 to 500 of them will be Ugandan brands. So what are we saying? If you have money that will be looking to do franchising, it's your time. But more importantly, if you have a brand that could grow the franchising model, you can get in touch with us, and we'll be able to take you through the steps. Yes, we'll be able to take you through the steps that you require to go through franchising. And more importantly, we have a pool of equity funders who are able to, who are actually looking to invest in different businesses.
Unfortunately, I might have to cut you off because we have a very important news coming in. Mr. Wambugu Gichoi, thank you very much. The topic is really huge, and maybe we could even spend a night here. Thank you so much, and we'll be getting to hear from you once again. Thank you very much for having me. And you're welcome. And that was The Link. We are going to have a special announcement or news coming in from Arua, where we know a by-election has been happening.